Hey there, fellow knowledge seekers, and welcome to the Deep Dive. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the information surrounding India's environmental laws, you're not alone. Whether you're a UPSC aspirant prepping for those tough exams, or a student diving into environmental studies, or just someone curious about how we protect our natural heritage, this deep dive is for you. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss any future deep dives. We've got some fascinating legal ground to cover today.
That's right. We're going to break down these complex acts into insights that are easy to understand, uncover those aha moments that help the knowledge stick, and see how these laws actually play out in the real world.
All right, let's set the stage. Today we're tackling a comprehensive guide to India's environmental laws, with a special focus on the ones that pop up all the time in the UPSC syllabus. But even if you're not prepping for exams, this stuff is essential knowledge for anyone who cares about India's future. We'll be going through landmark acts like the Wildlife Protection Act, the Environment Protection Act, and many more. Get ready, because we're about to uncover the goals, the key provisions, and the real-world impact of these laws, all without getting lost in the legal jargon.
Exactly. Think of this as your legal compass, guiding you through the intricate world of environmental protection in India.
Now, where better to start our legal safari than with the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972? This one's all about protecting India's awesome diversity of wildlife.
It's amazing how this act is like a shield for everything, from those incredible Bengal tigers to even the tiniest insects. And it's not just about stopping hunting, it's about making sure entire ecosystems can thrive.
I read that there are even different levels of protection within the act, right? Like certain species get the VIP treatment.
You got it. It's like a system with tiers, with Schedule A offering the most protection for the species that are most vulnerable. Think about animals like the snow leopard or the gharial. These animals face the biggest threats, and the penalties for harming them are way stricter than for species in the other schedules.
So it's not just a general protect all wildlife approach. It's strategically focused to tackle specific threats. That's smart.
Right, and that's one of the big reasons the Wildlife Protection Act has been so important in bringing species like the tiger back from almost going extinct. Back in the 1970s, India only had about 1,800 tigers left in the wild. Thanks in part to this act, the tiger population has bounced back to almost 3,000 today.
That's incredible progress. It shows you how powerful these laws can be when they're implemented right.
And it's not only about protecting individual species, it's about preserving their habitats, too. The act led to protected areas being set up, like national parks and wildlife sanctuaries, which are super important for conservation in the long term.
Okay, so picture this. You're trekking through a lush national park, and bam, you see a majestic tiger just hanging out in its natural habitat. The Wildlife Protection Act helped make that incredible moment possible.
Exactly. It's about making sure future generations can experience how amazing India's wildlife is, and not just read about it in books.
But let's be real, protecting wildlife is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to the environment. What about the air we breathe, the water we drink, the overall health of our environment? Where do the laws come in there?
Well, that's where the Environment Protection Act of 1986 comes in. This act came out of a terrible tragedy, the Bhopal gas tragedy of 1984.
Yeah, a stark reminder of what can happen when environmental regulations are ignored, or just not good enough. A truly sad chapter in India's history.
You're right. The Bhopal gas tragedy was a wake-up call. It showed everyone how badly we needed a comprehensive law to protect the environment. The Environment Protection Act gives the central government the power to set standards for pollution from industries, regulate hazardous substances, and set up procedures for dealing with environmental emergencies.
So it's like the government's main tool for fighting pollution and environmental damage.
You could say that. The act covers so much. Everything from air and water pollution to noise pollution and how we manage hazardous waste. It's designed to be flexible and responsive, so it can adapt to new environmental challenges as they come up.
So next time you take a deep breath of fresh air, or have a glass of clean water, remember that the Environment Protection Act might have had something to do with that.
It's definitely a key player in making sure our environment is good quality. Of course, it's not perfect, and there are definitely challenges when it comes to enforcing it and making sure it's implemented correctly. But the Act gives us a crucial legal framework for tackling pollution and protecting public health.
Now, let's head into the heart of India's green lungs, the forests. We've got a bunch of laws dedicated to protecting them, don't we?
We sure do. It starts with the Indian Forest Act of 1927. which was a huge deal when it was passed. It aimed to regulate how forests were used, prevent deforestation, and make sure there was a steady supply of timber for the country.
So even back then, they knew that forests needed to be protected, not just exploited, right?
Absolutely. But as India's population grew and development pressures increased, we needed a stronger legal framework. That's where the Forest Conservation Act of 1980 comes in. This act basically put the brakes on deforestation by requiring the central government to approve anything that would change forest land into non-forest land.
So they realized we couldn't just clear forests for development projects
Yeah.
without thinking about the consequences.
Exactly. The approval process is a big deal. It involves a tough assessment of the potential damage to the environment, and developers have to come up with plans to make up for any trees they cut down. It's all about finding a balance between developing the country and conserving our forests. And helping guide that balance is the National Forest Policy of 1988.
So what's the big vision of this policy?
It sets a really ambitious goal, maintaining 33% forest cover across the whole country, with even higher targets for areas with mountains. The policy emphasizes how important forests are, ecologically, economically, and socially. It promotes managing forests sustainably, planting more trees, and getting communities involved in conservation.
Those are some ambitious goals.
Yeah.
But forests are more than just trees, aren't they? They're connected to the lives and livelihoods of tons of communities.
You're absolutely right. And that's where the Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Act of 2006 comes in. This act marks a big change in how we think about forests and the people who depend on them.
Okay, break that one down for me, 'cause it sounds a little complicated.
Basically, it recognizes the rights that forest-dwelling communities have had to their traditional lands and resources for a long time. For centuries, these communities have lived in a way that doesn't harm the forests. They've managed them sustainably. And they have a ton of knowledge about their ecosystems that's been passed down through generations.
So it's about recognizing them as the caretakers of the forests.
Exactly. It's about giving them the power to participate in how the forests are managed and making sure they benefit from using forest resources sustainably.
It's about understanding that conservation works best when it involves the people who are most connected to the forests.
Exactly. And that's a theme you see a lot in India's environmental laws, the idea that protecting the environment isn't just something the government does. It's a team effort that includes communities, experts, and the government working together. You know, it's interesting. These laws might seem separate, but they're all connected. They create this whole framework for protecting the environment.
Okay, I like where this is going. Give me an example. How does that interconnectedness actually work?
Let's say there's a mining company, and they want to extract bauxite from a forest. That's when the Forest Conservation Act kicks in. They can't touch any trees until the central government says it's okay.
So it's not just a simple yes from the government, right? What actually happens during that process?
Oh, not at all. They do a whole evaluation to figure out how much damage there could be to the environment. They get experts from different fields involved to look at the ecological impact, the social impact, even the economic consequences.
So it's like walking a tightrope,
Yeah,
trying to balance the need for resources
yeah,
with the need to protect the environment.
exactly. And that's where the Compensatory Afforestation Fund Act comes in, or CAMPA for short. If the mining project gets approved, the company usually has to pay into this fund.
So it's like a way to make up for the environmental damage, like you break it, you fix it kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The money from CAMPA is then used to plant trees in other areas to compensate for the trees lost in the forest. Ideally, this helps maintain the overall forest cover and all the good things forests do for us.
Okay, that's good to know. But what about the people who live in those forests or rely on them for their livelihood? Are they just left out?
That's where the Forest Rights Act comes in. It makes sure their rights are protected. Before any forest land can be used for something else, the government has to make sure the rights of those forest-dwelling communities are acknowledged and protected.
So it's not just about protecting trees. It's about protecting people, too.
Exactly. They have to consider how those communities traditionally use the land, make sure they aren't displaced unfairly, and ensure they have a voice in the decision-making.
It's like this three-pronged approach: sustainable development, protecting the environment, and social justice, all working together.
Right. And you see that a lot in India's environmental laws, this interwoven approach. Take the Wildlife Protection Act and the Biological Diversity Act, for example. They both aim to conserve India's natural treasures, but they have different focuses.
Help me understand the difference. They sound like they're doing similar things.
So the Wildlife Protection Act, like we talked about, is all about protecting wild animals and their habitats. Things like poaching, illegal wildlife trade, and destruction of habitats.
So it's like a special unit for wildlife. What does the Biological Diversity Act do that's different?
The Biological Diversity Act is like looking through a wider lens. It recognizes that all living organisms are important, from tiny bacteria to giant trees, and all the ecosystems they form. It's about protecting this whole web of life.
Okay, so it's a more holistic approach, understanding that everything is connected.
Exactly. And it's not just about protection. The Biological Diversity Act also wants to make sure biological resources are used sustainably and that India benefits from its biodiversity, especially when other people use it, like for research or making products.
So if a company from another country wants to make a new drug using a rare plant found in India, they can't just take it and use it however they want.
No, not at all. The Biological Diversity Act says India gets to have a say in how its biological resources are used. There are ways to share the benefits, making sure that any profits from India's biodiversity are shared fairly.
That makes sense. It's like recognizing that India's biodiversity is this valuable asset that needs to be protected and managed the right way.
You got it. It's amazing how these laws create this safety net for India's natural heritage.
But let's be honest, laws are only as good as how well they're enforced. What are some of the challenges in making these ambitious acts a reality?
There are always challenges, especially when you're dealing with environmental problems that are so complicated. Sometimes there just aren't enough resources for monitoring and enforcement, especially in remote areas. Trying to balance economic development with environmental protection can be tough too.
I bet that's a constant battle.
It can be. You also have different groups with conflicting interests. Industries, communities, conservationists. Finding solutions that are fair and sustainable for everyone, that's a big challenge.
So how does India deal with these obstacles? What's the way forward?
The government has been working on strengthening how we manage the environment. The National Green Tribunal, for example, plays a really important role in holding polluters accountable and making sure environmental laws have some teeth. But there's always room for improvement. We need to be vigilant and work together.
So it's an ongoing process, learning, adapting, and making those legal frameworks stronger to make sure they really do protect our environment.
Absolutely. And it's not just the government's job. This is where we come in as informed citizens.
Okay, now I'm really interested. You're saying we have a role to play beyond just following the rules.
For sure. Citizen participation is crucial for any environmental law to succeed. You don't need a law degree to make a difference.
So what can we actually do? It can feel overwhelming to think about making a difference on such a big scale.
First, understand the laws and how they affect your local environment. If you see someone breaking the rules, report it to the authorities. Get involved in public hearings about environmental issues so your voice can be heard. You can even support environmental NGOs. They're doing amazing work on the ground.
So stay informed, speak up, and support the people fighting for a healthy environment.
Exactly. Even small actions can have a big impact. Simple things like saving water and energy, reducing waste, and making thoughtful choices about what you buy, it all adds up.
It's about making sure what we do every day lines up with the ideas behind these environmental laws, making them more than just words on paper.
You nailed it. Remember, these laws are all about protecting the air we breathe, the water we drink, the forests we love, and all that incredible biodiversity that makes India so special.
It's easy to get lost in all the legal terms, but at the end of the day, it's about protecting our planet, our home.
Exactly. And these laws give us a roadmap to do just that. Let's dig into some of the fascinating details within these laws, shall we? Did you know the Wildlife Protection Act actually protects plants, too?
Oh, really? I thought it was just about animals.
A lot of people think that. But Schedule 6 of the Act lists plant species that are protected. This includes different trees, medicinal plants, and other plants that are considered threatened or endangered. Think about the red sanders tree. It's a valuable timber species found in South India, and it's in high demand on the black market. This act protects it from being exploited.
So you can't just cut down certain types of trees or harvest certain plants without permission.
You got it. The act is trying to stop people from overexploiting these valuable plants and put an end to the illegal trade.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the Environment Protection Act? Any hidden gems in there?
The Environment Protection Act gives the central government a lot of power. They can issue notifications on specific environmental issues. This allows them to act quickly when new challenges come up.
Can you give me an example? What kind of notifications are we talking about?
They cover a lot of ground, from setting stricter rules on how much pollution industries can emit to regulating how hazardous waste is handled, to even declaring certain zones as ecologically sensitive.
So it's a tool that can change and adapt as the environmental landscape changes.
Exactly. And it makes the act a lot stronger because those notifications have the power of law.
I'm really curious about the Forest Rights Act now. We talked about how it recognizes the rights of forest-dwelling communities, but how does that actually play out in real life?
One of the key things it does is recognize community forest resource rights. This means that communities have the right to protect, regenerate, conserve, and manage the forest resources within their traditional territories.
So it's not just about letting them use forest products. It's about giving them a say in how the forests are managed.
Exactly. It recognizes that these communities often know their local ecosystems better than anyone, and they're often the best caretakers of the forests.
It's about empowering them, letting them be active participants in conservation, not just passive recipients of policies.
You're absolutely right. And it's a shift away from how forest management used to be, which was very top-down. The Act also says that individuals have rights to forest land that they've been cultivating for generations.
So it's about giving land security to the people who depend on forests for their livelihoods and recognizing their historical connection to the land.
Exactly. It's acknowledging that many forest-dwelling communities were treated unfairly in the past, and their traditional rights were denied.
This is so interesting. I'm starting to understand how deep and complex these laws really are.
Me too. We're just scratching the surface here. Each act has so many provisions and details that are worth looking into.
Well, we've definitely covered a lot in this deep dive. From the big picture to the specific details, we've explored the intricacies of India's environmental laws.
And hopefully we've helped our listeners understand these laws a little better and see how important they are for protecting India's natural heritage.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up this part, I want to remind our listeners
To like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the final part of our deep dive into India's environmental laws.
welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. We're in the final stretch of our exploration of India's environmental laws. But before we wrap up, I want to connect these laws to something even bigger, the Indian Constitution.
That's a super important connection. Protecting the environment isn't just about policies or laws, it's built into the core of India's legal system.
So where does the Constitution fit in? Why is it so important in this context?
Well, you have several articles in the Constitution that set the stage for environmental protection, like Article 48A, which is part of the directive principles of state policy. It says the state shall endeavor to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard the forests and wildlife of the country.
So it's not just a suggestion, it's like a fundamental duty of the state to protect the environment.
Exactly. It's a constitutional obligation, not just something they can choose to do or not do. And it's not only the state's responsibility. Citizens have a role to play too. Article 51A, which lists the fundamental duties of citizens, includes the duty to protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures.
So it goes both ways. The state has a duty to protect, and citizens have a duty to be a part of that protection.
You got it. These parts of the Constitution give us a solid foundation for making and enforcing environmental laws. They also give citizens the power to hold the government accountable for how they're doing when it comes to the environment.
It's pretty amazing to see environmental protection treated as a core value in the Indian Constitution.
It really is. It shows how forward-thinking the people who wrote the Constitution were. They recognized that a healthy environment and a thriving society are connected.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. We've gone from big, famous acts like the Wildlife Protection Act to those regulations that maybe aren't as well known, but are just as crucial, like the hazardous and other waste rules. It's clear that India has built this strong legal system to protect its natural heritage.
Totally agree. It's been fascinating to explore all the details of these laws, how they connect, the challenges of putting them into practice, and how they're rooted in the Indian Constitution.
We started by understanding the history and goals of these laws, then looked at specific provisions, and talked about how they work in the real world. And we emphasized how important it is for citizens to get involved, to make these laws effective.
It's been a comprehensive journey. We covered a lot about Indian environmental law. I hope we've inspired people to dig deeper into this important topic.
Absolutely. Whether you're studying for the UPSC exams, a student, or just a concerned citizen, understanding these laws gives you the power to be a more informed advocate for protecting India's environment.
Well said. Protecting the environment is something we do together. Everyone has a role to play in making sure India's natural heritage thrives for generations to come.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into India's environmental laws. If you learned something new today, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into all sorts of fascinating topics. Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and remember, we're all in this together.